What do a speaking coach, a strategy consultant, and a psychedelics lawyer have in common? Sounds like the start of a bad joke, right? But honestly, it's all about finding out what people really do in their jobs. The stories, the struggles, the coffee breaks. The real stuff you won't find in a job book.
Welcome to a space where we sit down with people from all kinds of careers, have a laugh, and dive into what makes their work meaningful. Whether you're looking to learn something new or just here for a good story, let us be your guide. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Charlie.
And let's get
Casually Bro! Okay, so today we have an amazing and fascinating guest, in my opinion. Victoria Cvitanovic is an attorney that handles psychedelics use in medical components. And she actually came from the background of being a narcotics prosecutor. Of all things, fascinating. Victoria, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So there is a lot that I would love to unpack just in the name of psychedelics lawyer. But let's start with what do you do and why is it so cool?
So I get to help businesses that are working on the edge of medicine to provide the best kinds of patient care, and also businesses that are helping build out the infrastructure for a more liberalized and just society. I work with mostly psychedelics providers and cannabis providers, and I help them with everything from forming their corporation through building their compliance plans to even helping them figure out how to advocate at the state and national level for the laws that they would like to see so that people who need or want access to psychedelic medicine or to cannabis, either for medical or for recreational use, can have that access in a way that's fair and equitable.
Wow. So before we start to dive right into it, Victoria, I'm personally from Europe and I'm not completely sure about what's the current state in this area in the US. I think this is something that's very new. The legalization process has started very recently and it's different given the state you're in. Is that right?
That's correct. The United States legal field for cannabis and for psychedelic medicine varies pretty tremendously from state to state. When we talk about classic psychedelics like psilocybin, those things are Schedule 1 controlled dangerous substances, according to the Controlled Substances Act that the US federal government has promulgated. So what we've seen happen is the states where there's been the political will to open up the markets for things like cannabis or certain psychedelics have implemented their own laws to create systems that exist just within those states. So, for example, we have states in the US that just allow for medical cannabis. Then we have states that have both a medical and a recreational market for cannabis. And then we have 3 states that have passed medical psilocybin programs, as well as decriminalization of psilocybin laws in 2 out of those 3 states. So it's very patchwork, and it's easy as a business person to get a little bit lost when you're trying to comply with these rules and make yourself competitive in one of these markets. It can also be hard to focus in on what it is that we care about the most, that community of people who need or want to access these things. And so by having a lawyer walk you through all of the steps of how to do this, you can organize your business to be both profitable and socially equitable.
That's fascinating because it's the brink of a new line of business and compliance in that business uh, that I think we're kind of seeing play out in real time. Um, but I'm a sucker for stories, and your story in particular is fascinating to me because first and foremost, I don't think a lot of people wake up one day and think, you know, I want to work specifically with businesses that are focused on, these controlled substances. Um, or if they do, they might have been using them for a while. But your story doesn't start there. It actually starts much earlier in your career where you were kind of on the other side of the table, so to speak. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I graduated law school at the height of the recession caused by the housing crisis in 2008. I was one of the hundreds of JDs that graduated as some of the largest JD classes that the United States has ever seen. Lots of people my age went to law school, whether they wanted to be lawyers or not, to kind of delay that entry into a job market that was not prepared to accept the people graduating from college at that time. We had massive amounts of new lawyers, and we had a ton of people who were even as second or third year attorneys applying to those kind of first year positions. So it was a scary time to graduate law school. I remember applying to absolutely everything, just kind of hoping I'd be able to pay my bills and I'd figure out my path. And I ended up going through the hiring process to be an assistant district attorney. I never thought I would get selected for that job. And it turns out that my style and the way that I speak ended up being a fit for this office. So I got hired. I started out in felony magistrate court, and then I went basically straight into narcotics prosecution. It was complicated for me. I've always been a bit of a bleeding heart liberal who's had a hard time seeing a lot of the harm or the reasons why the Controlled Substances Act looks the way that it does. And when I was forced to make those charging decisions, there's this thing that happens in prosecution called screening, where a police officer makes an arrest and they list certain charges as being the reason for that arrest. And the DA's office can either accept those charges as is, can modify them, or can reject them. And the attorney that does that's often called a screening attorney or a screener. And when I sat in those shoes for drug cases, I found myself really struggling with looking at the facts and seeing what charges were accurate next to the penalties for that conduct. It was disheartening to see that this is what an accurate representation of this policy would look like. Obviously, I did my job and charged people as they were required to be charged, but it made me start to get incredibly disheartened with the way that the entire system works. I saw a lot of people charged accurately based on their conduct who had to get pled down because there wasn't the political will to enforce the kinds of sentences that they would be getting if they were sentenced on the charges that were accurate based on that conduct. And seeing how many people were truly disheartened by this and were truly of the opinion that it was time for a revamp affected me profoundly. I ended up leaving public service and went to work in healthcare law. I was determined to learn what it was about the American healthcare system that had resulted in me seeing so many people who should have been patients dependent on an illicit market and getting involved in criminal behavior. I was so young and I didn't understand how this could possibly be happening to so many sick people. And it did. Then I had my own accident and I became one of those sick people. I was in an accident at the gym. I broke my back and I ended up immobile for months and having to work through the process of relearning how to walk again and engaging with the healthcare system in the same way that I had been trying to as a lawyer, but as a patient this time. Seeing that change changed what I wanted to do with my life. I remember being approached by one of my clients, um, the absolute sweetest person in the world, just the dream client for a lawyer. And she came to me and she said, Victoria, I can see that you're suffering. You're in pain. The healthcare system is making it very difficult for you to access next steps. You've come such a long way in your career, and I don't want to see you lose it all. You should do psychedelic assisted therapy. And I just busted out laughing. I thought that was the funniest thing in the entire world. Here I was, this ex-narcotics prosecutor. I was this very sober Zen Buddhist who is fully focused on living this very present, mindful life. And this person was telling me to do drugs. I just found that ridiculous. But she didn't give up on me. I gave her the most dismissive, prejudiced response that I possibly could have, and she didn't give up on me. She actually called my priest, and my priest called me back, and he asked me a question that changed the course of my career, my life, and the way that I think about the world. And that was, is psychedelic assisted therapy for connection or is it for escapism? Sitting and thinking about that, it clicked for me that I wasn't being asked by all of these people who love me and care about me to go get high and run away from my problems. Not a single one of them woke up one morning and was like, you know what Victoria should do? Party more. They all missed me. They missed this person who is part of their community. They saw that I was holding too much stuff and that I couldn't participate in my own life and in my own relationships in the way that I should have in the amount of pain I was in after my accident. So I tried the therapy. I did ketamine-assisted therapy with this client who made me feel really safe. She walked me through how the process works, how ketamine is scheduled as a Schedule III drug, all of those things. And after my first treatment, I remember grabbing her hands and saying, oh my God, you have to let me look at your insurance. This cannot go away. This can't fall apart. And so I did right after my first ketamine session. We did integration therapy and then we sat down and looked at her insurance documents. And we found a number of gaps in coverage that could make operating this ketamine clinic a lot less risky. So we started there. And then we started with her agreements and then her leases and her employment relationships and her tax strategy. And we started working through all of the aspects of running this psychedelic assisted therapy business and how we could make it less stressful, less risky, and safer for both her and patients. After I did that, word spread, started working with other ketamine clinics. And then when psilocybin started coming online, I started working with those providers. The cannabis people came after all of that. I'm the only person I know who went from psychedelic law to cannabis law instead of the other way around. But the work started to come. And so I ended up shifting my focus away from traditional law. I was at the time working for a large law firm doing mostly healthcare and also working for large corporate clients. I let that go and put my focus with these small businesses that are starting up and these providers that are pushing the boundaries of science forward to help those patients like me that were in a position where your options are opiates or suffer. That's what I thought my options were, and I had chosen to just be in pain. But somebody threw me a lifeline, and I see my work as part of throwing other people that same lifeline.
Wow, that's a crazy story, Victoria. It's an amazing story. I think in technical terms, it's what we call a dame story. So if I were to summarize, because it's so, there are so many points I would like to rebound on. So let's see how it goes. In the beginning, you did something very interesting that most people are told not to do. You weren't really sure where to go, and since the options were quite hard to get in this job market, you fired in many directions. And most of the time, people hear you have to know what you want because otherwise you will not get what you want. But some people might know, but for others, sometimes it's really hard. And firing in all directions, in many directions that just feel okay. Because obviously you don't know what it is to be in this situation. And what you think you know might be entirely wrong. And in this case, you found a passion. You found a path, you found a passion, and so much of a passion that you're here today to talk about it on a podcast. So this
Absolutely.
is a really high level of passion. And I think this is something that people should hear. This is also a strategy to find your path and your passion. Then you found problems in the system, and then suddenly you see yourself in the other side. And this is also something absolutely amazing because you learn so much by being on the other side. If you are working with customers in order to help them achieve something, seeing you on the other side makes you realize, wow, okay. For example, if you have a business and you struggle to sell, try to buy something and you will know what you are looking for, how you do to buy and to compare and to take your decision. It's very hard to just do it if you so you were in the other side, and then this probably opened your eyes in many ways and gave you many insights.
Absolutely. I really agree with what you said. And I think young lawyers need to hear that more than anyone else, or law students need to hear that more than anyone else. I saw so many people go to law school and say, I'm going to be a criminal lawyer, I'm going to be a bankruptcy attorney, or I'm going to do this or that. You have no idea what it's like to practice law when you're in law school. It doesn't matter where you intern or what you do, it's incredibly different once it's your license on the line. And so I wish more young lawyers would take that strategy of firing in many directions, especially young lawyers like me that are first generation lawyers who don't have anyone in their family that can put in that good word for them or guide their career a little bit. Firing in many directions and not limiting yourself too early. I think it's incredibly important when you're coming out of school with this very expensive graduate degree and not enough experience to justify locking yourself into one path.
Oh yeah, that's totally true. Oh, there is something else I wanted to do a rebound. At some point, you said uh, psychedelics are used for connection or avoidance, and this is really profound because it applies to many things, and it's one of the main way to assess whether a behavior is what we call workable or not workable. So a little bit of a psychology geek, but just to give an overview, I would say a behavior is workable is every time you do it, it makes your life more meaningful. It creates something. And it's not workable if the more you do it, the more you shut down, and the worse your life, the more problems you have, the lower your self-esteem. And so we always try to find behaviors that are workable. But the catch is whether a behavior is workable or unworkable has nothing to do with the behavior itself. Give an example, running, for example. If you like to run, you can run because it gives you energy. It makes you feel healthy. It makes you feel great. But you can also run to avoid your problems. And it's the same with eating. Oh yeah, I like to eat, even eating fast food. You can eat fast food mindfully every once in a while because you enjoy it, because you like it. But if you eat fast food to feel better, to feel something that feels empty inside you, then it's not. So I just wanted to make this pass over here to talk about this. And I leave the mic to my colleague Charles.
Uh, well, you said everything profound. I ran out of really cool things to say. So I'm just gonna ask one thing, Victoria, because there's something about your story that really resonates with me as a person. And it's because I have always had such a stubborn streak in me, a decision, a very opinionated way of living. And every single good thing in my life, and I don't hesitate to say every single good thing in my life, has come when someone is telling me, hey, you're probably wrong about this. Here's why. And then it just completely annihilates my prejudices towards certain things. I tell everyone I meet the story of my dog, right? I grew up with cats. I love cats. And but I've never gotten along with dogs. Almost never. Um, I've actually been attacked by dogs multiple times. And so my wife, who I love more than anything in this universe, she grew up with dogs. And when we got married, she told me, Charlie, I want a dog. And so I told her, no, I don't think so. I don't think it's right for us. What, the whole nine. And so we compromised by getting a dog. And in doing so, I met the sweetest little puppy that every day brings joy to my life. And when I walk in the door, she runs and she jumps on top of me, and it's a type of, I guess, like, love and wellness that I haven't experienced before in my life, and it changed me. But that capability is in everyone. And so I guess what I'm getting to here is your story is not one of just a linear path, and not one of just it's a natural progression. It's one of resistance that gave way to passion, to goodness. What kind of was the moment for you where you recognize, like, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life? And what was it like for you to get that realization and then look at what happened before in your life and say, okay, well, how do I get to the next level? How do I get to be able to do that? What was that like for you?
I think there are a couple of moments looking back when everything changed or what I wanted changed. The first was right after my injury. There was this day when I couldn't get out of my car by myself, and I had really been forcing myself to do it. At the time, we drove like an SUV. My husband and I shared a car, and I was in the passenger seat of the SUV, and I couldn't get down by myself. When my injury happened, I was 29 years old. I had only been married for like 5 years. This all felt like it was happening too soon and too quickly. So I had been forcing myself to do things physically that I probably shouldn't have been doing, especially not without mobility devices. And I remember my husband had to carry me out of the car and up the stairs of our house. We lived in New Orleans at the time, so it's like an elevated house, and had to like get me inside. And while he was carrying me inside, he had left the car door open and someone stole my purse out of the car. And I remember that moment breaking me in a way that was incredibly difficult for me to understand at the time. I felt like I had lost complete control of my life. My body wasn't working. I couldn't keep my belongings safe. Everything felt insane. And at that moment, the most important thing in my life went from being an extremely successful lawyer and a great wife and, a great friend and all those things to I just want to have a little bit of peace back. And what does that look like? The next moment was after that first ketamine assisted therapy session. I remember walking to the car where my husband was, and he asks me, "So what happened?" And I looked at him and I said, "I have absolutely no idea, but it's like magic." And I spent the next few weeks journaling and integrating and working with my therapist. And somebody asked me, "What happened in that first session?" I don't know, but it was like magic. And all I could think about was how hopeless I had felt before this. Before my first session, I had been in pain every day for a year. It was awful. And then all of a sudden, I was laughing again. I was like writing in my journal and like, today was a great day. I was taking these little mood assessments, and my mood was up like 4 points from where it had been before. And I was all of a sudden like, we might be able to cure intractable depression. we might be able to really help people who have these long-term injuries. It wasn't like my pain got better. This wasn't magic in that sense, but it was magic in the sense that all of a sudden I had room for that pain and I had room to hold it and be patient with it and have it be a part of my life instead of having it consume my life. It went from being this thing that was so far out of my bounds to cope with to something I could deal with and that it felt approachable and it felt fine. The last one of those moments was the first time I had a ketamine operator come to me and say, "We're going to close if we can't figure out this issue." They're having an issue with insurance and off-label ketamine usage. And so I actually ended up having an insurer, a representative of this person's insurance company, come with me to one of my ketamine sessions. So I could show them what it's like, what's happening in this clinic that you're insuring, and how should you insure this risk. And that person, when they left, they booked an appointment. They were like, "I want to try this. I want to see it happen." They had been struggling with some intractable depression, and they booked that consultation to see if it was right for them. And I was just shocked. I've seen these hearts and minds change along the way, myself included. But that final moment when someone who had no connection to the psychedelics community, no connection to this like growing area of mental health treatment, say, "Hey, I know I'm here on business, but this really profoundly affected me. And I've been struggling too, and I think I might need your help." That was the moment when I knew that there was nothing else for me to do. All of the changes that had happened in myself, in my soul, in my law practice kind of merged at that moment when I saw how it could help such diverse people who had no connection to this community previously.
Wow, that's so profound. And just to make sure, I'm gonna ask the question. We are not just talking about a short-term revelation. We are talking about something powerful that becomes a long term and insights that become part of the life of you and of those people, right?
Absolutely. I was blessed with a practitioner who really imprinted upon me before my first session how important the pre-integration and then the post-integration process were going to be in order for me to really digest the things that came up during the session and make it a part of my life, and also take advantage of that neural plasticity that is the reason why we do psychedelic assisted therapy in the first place. So when I started, I already knew this is going to be a process of integrating these insights and working for that change. And I was very surprised at how quickly, when I was with this practitioner and doing things to integrate, my mood, my pain, my issues started to resolve. And I'm years out from my first session. I'm over 3 years out. And I still think about that first session and the ways in which it opened my mind and opened my heart such that I'll never be the same. And I think that that's good.
It's really funny because change is one of those things, and change in nature is one of those things that's uniquely human, right? I constantly say on this podcast, and I guess pretty much everywhere, that I love people because they are unique in the entire animal kingdom as the only creature that can change its very nature day to day, right? We have this innate response in ourselves that if we don't like the situation that we're in, we're going to work like hell to get out of it. Sometimes that's changing a really unique and core part of who we are. You know, I have tremendous respect for people who do that. And I think that's why, uh, in all, and in the spirit of being candid, I chose to kind of partner up with Jeff here, because we take these big strides and these big swings, and going from an engineer to a public speaking coach is no small feat, but neither is going from a screener to an attorney that focuses primarily on making sure that these drugs can be used in a responsible and effective manner. Um, what is, I guess, what was the biggest challenge for you making that change? Because I could imagine it's not easy going to your family or, your partner or, anyone who's known you for quite a long time and say, hey, listen, I kind of want to represent people who do drugs. Like that might be a bit difficult. Can you tell us about like what some of the challenges might have been?
Sure. I think that I was in a different situation than the average person that has to go tell their parents they're doing something weird with their job. My family had the experience of seeing me become disabled at 29. I was not born with a disability. I did not grow up with a disability, but in a 2-second fall, I had one. And I had joined the only community that any of us as humans can join in an instant. I was disabled. And what my parents saw and what my family saw when it came to changing my career was someone learning to not only live in their disabled body, but love living in their disabled body again. The hardest part for me was not coming to my husband or coming to my mom and saying, hey, guess what? I'm quitting my very secure big law job to chase after psychedelics business and cannabis business. The biggest challenge for me was learning to love being in my body again and learning to be proud of living as a disabled person and seeing that as a joyful and useful part of my life, seeing it as a way to connect with other people rather than something that I needed to hide or constantly be trying to compensate for so that other people weren't inconvenienced. I think after all of that, after my family watching me learn to walk again, learn to shower again, learn to drive again, the hey, I'm going to go do this thing that I really love part of it was much easier to accept. I think they already knew why I was doing it before I said it.
Wow. So in retrospective, you would say that this was a hard event, but that in the end gave you something that you learned from it.
Absolutely. Human bodies are really fragile. And to live in a human body is to live in a very high risk environment. Any of us can become disabled at any moment. Bodies age, bodies change. Whatever abilities you have today, you're almost certainly not going to have them at some point in your life. And I think that that was incredibly abstract to me. And of course it was. I was 29. I was, going to the gym all the time and I was doing aerial silks and I was having a great time. And having this injury happen so young impressed upon me really quickly a couple of things. Number one, this is the only place I can never leave. This body that I have is the only place I'll ever truly be. It's the only place I'll never leave. It is mine. And so I have to figure out a way to work with it and be in tune with it, regardless of the ways in which my mobility changes or my abilities change. The second thing that I learned really, really quickly was that pain is impatient. Pain sucks the life out of everything else around you and says, pay attention to me right now. It's as if you had put a bright, flashing red light directly in front of your face, and you had to have that in front of your face all the time while you were trying to work or trying to talk to other people or trying to do anything else. And that only by working with that pain can you start to move the light and get a little bit of your perspective back. The last thing I learned was that it's okay to be angry. I think women are told to suppress their anger and to be as positive as possible all the time. A good woman is one that's smiling and happy and is overly positive. And there's a lot of that in the disability community too. A lot of people will comment things or say things to disabled people like, "You're so inspiring." But if you weren't upset that you got hurt, if you weren't upset that you're in pain, if you weren't upset that things were hard, that would be really bad. Your anger is this sign that you love yourself and that you recognize that things are unfair and that you believe that you should be treated better than whatever's happening to you. And that self-love that shows up in the form of anger can carry you through some really, really hard things. So yes, as tough as it was to have this happen to me, and as much as I would never wish for a person who's able-bodied to lose those abilities, it's going to happen to a lot of us. And I hope that people know that there are really good things on the other side.
I'm reminded of a good friend and a previous guest on our podcast who is disabled. And he said that one of the most infuriating parts of speaking to people who aren't disabled is this twinge of pity. And he constantly says he loves his life. He's so incredibly grateful to be on this earth doing what he does. Um, and it's not something to feel bad about that he's in the position that he's in, because without it, he wouldn't have found something that he truly loved and enjoyed. I think it's a true testament to the capability of people to turn something negative into a positive, but more than that is to understand the difference between pain and suffering, right? Pain is inevitable in all of our lives, whether it's physical or emotional. Uh, Hell, some people would even say spiritual, but it's going to happen. But your ability to live through it and do something with it is your capability to prevent suffering. Suffering is entirely optional. When we look at your story from a point of view of, I would argue privilege, it's really difficult for us to understand and conceptualize this working with pain. Can you give us some examples of what that might be so that we can kind of get on the same wavelength?
Sure. I'll back up a little bit first and address what your friend said about this twinge of pity. I had a similar experience, but a little bit different when it was starting for me. My accident happened in front of a bunch of my friends. We all went to the same gym, so people knew what was going on with me pretty young, pretty early in this accident. And people would say things to me like, "Oh my God, I don't know how you do it. I couldn't do this if I were you." And I remember wanting to like take people by the shoulders and shake them and be like, "I don't have a choice. You would do this because you have to. There is no not having a life. If you have bills to pay, if you've got a family to be around, if you have stuff, responsibilities, you can't just stop because you're in pain." I always tell people to like imagine today that you were getting out of your car and you rolled your ankle. Maybe you didn't break it, but you rolled your ankle hard enough that you were in that kind of nagging, nasty joint pain, and you felt it with every step. But the reason you were getting out of your car is to take your kid to the doctor. And then after that, you had to go back to work. And then parent-teacher conferences were that night. And then your spouse has to go to the airport in the morning because they've got to meet with their boss for a really important performance review in another city. And then you have a job too, and your house is dirty, and the kids are busy. But that rolled ankle is still there. And with every step, you feel it. But you keep taking those steps because there are things that have to be done. Long-term chronic pain is a lot like that. A lot of times treatment can bring down the level of pain that you're in from, scorchingly horrible to something less horrible. But ultimately, you're going to keep taking those steps forward because life requires that you take those steps forward. I am lucky enough to be married to the most wonderful man in the world. We have 3 dogs and a cat. I have this great job at Rudick Law Group where I'm surrounded by people that I care about and I'm passionate about it. But I also have to do things like get the mail and pay my taxes and go vote and do all of that citizen stuff. And my life isn't going to stop just because I'm not doing it as comfortably as maybe I would have been doing it before my accident. For me, that's been a lot about managing my mental health around my pain, grieving the body that I had before this happened, and the ways in which I took that mobility and that ease of movement for granted. Nothing will make you sad about every workout you ever skipped, quite like not being able to go to the gym for a couple of years. But you really do begin to learn that your life is just as important as the pain that you're in. And that the only way you get to still have the life is by learning to manage the pain.
Oh, I would still add something on this. You said if you don't have time, you do it. I imagine if you don't have the choice, you do it. But there's a difference between doing and going through without spirit, without life, and choosing to be happy. And I think there's still a lot of credit here for having the courage to choose the happy path because it doesn't happen automatically. There are people who go through life doing what they have to do without any spirit. They're low, they lose their enthusiasm, and they can go very long in this state. But there are others who are in a dire situation, but still choose to bring life, to bring enthusiasm, to bring something, and that's admirable. Victoria, now it's time to go in a mind-blowing territory. I knew it from the start, but if I were to learn it right now, I know my brain would find a way to go out of my school, maybe by the nose or the ears. You have been diagnosed with autism.
Yes.
Can you tell us first what it means? What it means here to say you have autism? What differences we're talking about? And with everything that you do, how is that even possible?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for bringing it up. I love getting an opportunity to talk about ASD and the ASD community. I am diagnosed with autism level 1, ASD level 1, which means that I have relatively low support needs, but I still have the differences that are associated with being neurodivergent in this way. I was originally diagnosed with ADHD, which is a combination of autism level 1 and ADHD. But when we started medicating my ADHD, we ended up finding out that that wasn't the most accurate diagnosis for me. So we ended up shifting over to that autism level 1. I live with sensory differences as a result of being autistic. I deal with the overstimulation that is very common to autistic people, the need for routine that's really common to autistic people, and the sensitivities to things like light, sound, the way fabric feels, et cetera, et cetera.
Could we have some little examples of what it really means to be in you?
Sure. So, one thing that I thought was completely normal until I was 30 years old was the fact that electricity smells different in different people's houses. And I remember casually mentioning to my husband, oh, the electricity in here smells like they have old wiring. Like the coppery smell is a lot more coppery. And he looked at me like I had lost my mind. Um, I did not know The smell of air-conditioned air or the smell of electricity were not things that most people spent their time really worried about. Um, I also used to, when I was younger, whenever I had to wear clothing that had seams in it, I would get these welts across my skin because I was so sensitive to the fabric rubbing against my skin in that way. I had gut imbalance issues that seemed to never resolve no matter what we did. And then come to find out, all of these things are related to living with autism.
It's it's fascinating for me because as someone who is a hyper enthusiast of communication, one of the most important things you need is attention to details, minute details that maybe others wouldn't notice. And it seems like you have that in spades because of your condition, but it's it's seen as such a I guess in a negative manner. But these things are critical for someone to create a profile, a persona, an understanding of someone or somewhere else that people spend decades building, right? Your ability to smell the difference in the air. Uh, for someone who works in trades, for example, that could have made them hundreds of thousands of dollars being able to figure out the difference between, okay, you might actually need a new or to have an overhaul of the wiring in your house. But we have this stigma towards people with autism, and it really it just seems so unfair. Have you had to deal with this in your time uh after your diagnosis, figuring out, maybe how do I tell people? How or if they find out, what do I say? How do you manage the kind of social expectation of living with autism?
Yeah, so I found out that I was autistic at 30 years old. And for me, I was already an adult. I had my career established. And I think when people found out that I was autistic, most people were like, yeah, that makes sense. She's always been the one wearing the noise canceling headphones, and she's always the one that could memorize everything about the jury in just a couple of seconds of voir dire. She's always the one that's predicting everybody's next step or the next behavior. So I think most people in my life were not that surprised. The surprise that I tend to deal with is from people who are meeting me for the first time. I do not hide this. And so a lot of times people will meet me and then they'll go to my LinkedIn or they'll go to my Instagram and they'll see me talking about being autistic. And they'll call me and they'll go, but you have such great social skills and you're so smart. How could you be autistic? And I kind of laugh and explain to them that autism and intelligence are things that vary. And you could have someone who's very highly intelligent and autistic, or someone who struggles more and is autistic at any of the levels of the spectrum. I have relatively low support needs, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. I do have to manage the amount of stimuli, the amount of intake that I take in. I do have to limit noise if I have had a rough day or had to do a lot of interacting with large crowds or in lots of noise. I do have to select my clothes carefully to make sure that I don't focus on them and I can focus on what I'm doing instead. I know those things seem really small, but if you don't know why you're doing them your whole life, it starts to feel like something's wrong with me. I'm weird and I'm different, and everybody around me is so able to go with the flow, and I'm just not. But what I've learned about myself through being diagnosed is that I can advocate for myself in a correct way. I know what it is that's going to help me be the most effective version of myself. And while my condition can be, in certain circumstances, overwhelming and hard, it's also my superpower. There's this joke about engineers, actually, Jeffrey, that If engineers were honest in those what's your superpower corporate questions that you get as an icebreaker, half of them would say my autism because it really is this thing that makes you more detail oriented, more able to ingest large amounts of information and more able to like focus deep down on a single thing and learn everything about it. I am very, very lucky to be autistic, and it still is also hard. And I sympathize greatly with those who don't have the support that they need, and for those parents that are dealing with children that are further along the spectrum who may need higher and higher levels of support. We do not live in a society that's very friendly to neurodivergent people. But in my situation, I have been able to make it work for me and to find a career and a law firm in which I feel supported.
Amazing. You transform something hard into a superpower. I have the same. I used to have very, very high social anxiety, like extremely high, very shy, avoiding people, avoiding any situation to talk to people. But that's also what, after years of very hard moments, unfortunately, it took me years to realize it. But no, I use it as a compass. Oh, there is something that's showing up. Oh, this problem means it's meaningful and important. And that's how I developed those skills, because I started to realize that it's funny. It doesn't happen when I do random things. It only happens when there is something I would like to do, but I somehow restrain myself to do it. And used it as a compass, allowed me to get amazing skills, and so much that I'm teaching people to have those skills too. So it's funny because here we have something in common. We have something that were a source of struggle, and that today we consider as a superpower. Super cool.
I think it's so interesting that you use the word compass to describe it. My experience has also resonated with that. I remember people used to say things, and I kind of thought that everyone was just pretending to go along with that thing because that was what you did socially. For example, I remember people saying public speaking is really scary. So you should be nervous when you're getting ready to speak in public or when you're going to trial or something like that. I don't have public speaking anxiety. That's not something that I've ever experienced. I like to joke that I was born without the caring after you introduce yourself to someone gene. Um, if I want to talk to you, I'm going to walk up and talk to you. But people said that for my entire childhood. Oh, public speaking is so scary. So I remember pretending to be afraid of public speaking because I thought that that was what you were supposed to do. And then I get diagnosed, and they're like, oh, you experience stimuli differently. And you might have different fears or different things that activate your anxiety than what activates a neurotypical person's anxiety. And it's okay if your fears or your anxiousness doesn't line up with everyone in the room. And I all of a sudden breathed a sigh of relief and was like, oh, I don't have to be afraid of these things that don't actually scare me anymore. All of a sudden it became a compass instead of a cloak that I had to wear or a mask that I had to wear.
Wow. So in your case, being diagnosed was extremely helpful for you.
Absolutely. I think being diagnosed opened my eyes not only to the way that I experience the world, but to the ways in which other people experience the world that could be radically different than me. I think it made me more empathetic. I think it made me more flexible and more understanding. And I think it made me less likely to try and guess how another person's going to feel or how another person's going to react instead of just asking them. Knowing that humans can vary so much has given me a lot more room to be appreciative of my fellow people.
It's so funny because hearing that you were diagnosed at 30 makes me think of my wife, who every once in a while she'll bring it up and she'll say, I think we should get you tested for ADD. And the more and more I look at, my background and what I do, um, and my interests and everything, and Jeff can tell you, uh, firsthand that I, like you, lack that part of me that is scared of talking to people and or public speaking. Um, but I have terrible anxiety over my calendar. To the point where I'm like, I know I'm forgetting to do something. I know something is off. And I'll reach out to Jeff at like 2 or 3 in the morning every once in a while and I say, hey, do we have a podcast today? um, and it's just such an interesting point because the three of us have three very different challenges and three very different backgrounds and experiences, but we all kind of coalesce in this idea of when we discovered who we were and who we are, the things that got better for us were innumerable. And this idea of introspection and creation and value that comes from understanding what you do and how you kind of turn that into something that's useful for yourself and possibly even others, um, is an incredible kind of gift that should never be looked down upon. And in the spirit of that, Jeff and I created this podcast because we wanted people to find value in the stories and experiences of everyone around us. And we found really incredible guests like yourself that come from many different walks of life. And the one thing that we ask of them towards the end of our podcast here is, you know, you've lived an incredible life full of lots of different paths and lots of different successes, but I'm sure they didn't come naturally, or at least not all of them. So you had to develop skills to bring you to where you are today. And what we want is for you to share one skill that anyone listening today can start working on to develop and turn into a tool that can bring them success like it made for you. What's one skill that you can recommend for everyone to start building today?
I think what I would say to that is learn to feel really confident connecting to a group instead of just an individual. At the moment when you can start telling your story or telling your offerings or telling your elevator pitch to a group and make those people feel like you've connected with each and every one of them, your capabilities as a professional, your capabilities as an advocate, and your capabilities as a person go through the roof. When we stop getting so focused on what each individual person thinks of us or thinks of every single gesture, and start focusing on the ways in which we can bring people together and connect across all of these differences between us, we can be so much more effective.
Oh yeah, completely amazing. And I would have something that most people don't know. But if you can connect well with one group, you hold the keys to connect with any other groups. The only thing that is different usually is your own story, your mind. You convince your, oh, it's different. Yeah. But group dynamics are something extremely common and similar in group dynamics. Thank you so much, Victoria, for this very insightful and interesting discussion. But before we finish this episode, I would like to ask you a question that we ask all of our guests. You will have 2 minutes with the magic microphone. And the magic microphone is magic because it allows you to give a message to everyone on Earth who's living today, but also people who will be here in the future generation. It's your moment to leave a universal and timeless message. What would it be?
Take a moment to love yourself as you were when you were a child, to love yourself as you are now, to love yourself as you will be when you're old, to love the person who it's the easiest in the world to love the person who you barely know, to love the person who irritates the crap out of you, to love everyone in your town, to love everyone in the world, and just consciously send that energy out. See how thinking that way changes you, and then live in that change.
What a beautiful message. Truly a phenomenal kind of gift it is to not just love yourself for who you are, but who you might be and who you were, because all of it, no matter whether you like it or not, is you. Victoria, thank you so much for being with us. One just quick question. Uh, where can we find you?
Yes, so if you want to find me or if you want to find a cannabis or a psychedelics attorney who's a real expert in the field, I work with Rudick Law Group and we are available on rudicklawgroup.com. You can also find me talking too much on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Victoria Cvitanovic, and I'm on Instagram as Victoria_instas.
Incredible. And we'll have all of those linked in the description below. But Victoria, thank you so much for joining us. This was really a pleasure having you on. And I think we all feel inspired, feel loved, and feel an acceptance for the cool things that might be.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Now, if you made it this far, make sure to like, subscribe, send it to a friend, especially if they need legal representation in some psychedelic areas, or just anyone you know who needs a little love and figuring out how to manage changes in their life. This was phenomenal, and make sure to check out Casually Pro every Wednesday. We have a new guest, just like Victoria, who are incredible and want to share some love, passion, and inspiration with everyone. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.